Hello and welcome to the Digital Publishing Podcast, Episode 5, I Was Born Accessible. In this episode, we interview Gregorio Pellegrino, Chief Accessibility Officer at the LIA Foundation, to discuss his publishing technology journey, legislation, funding and technical standards, to the role of AI in publishing processes and the future of EPUB. Enjoy! Gregorio, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of the Digital Publishing Podcast. How are you doing?
Fine, thanks, Simon, and hi everybody who is listening to this podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think you're going to be a popular guest here. You are a well-known personality in the publishing technical standards and accessibility spaces. But your training, as I understand it, is as a computer engineer. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about how you arrived in your current role as Chief Accessibility Officer at the LIA Foundation?
Yeah, I'm working at Fondazione LIA, as we call in Italian. As you can listen from my accent, I'm Italian.
Yeah, I tried to pronounce it properly, but I did a terrible job.
No problem. And I'm sorry if I'm not speaking English that well. It's my second language, as you.
It's a lot better than my Italian.
Do you want the short or the long version of the story?
The medium version, just to be difficult.
Fine. So actually, my parents funded a publishing house in 1995. So I literally grew up in publishing, doing all summer jobs within the publishing house. So, typesetting books, using PageMaker, that was the software at that time, and then InDesign and all that. And also working in the warehouse for making boxes of books and sending books around. Then I studied computer science, software engineering. And in 2010, so 2010, I went to New York with my father to visit some publishing house there. They were the biggest in the world, as you
remember?
Know. Yeah, sure. It was Penguin, Random House. Actually, there were still two different publishing houses, so Penguin and Random House, and I visit both and some others. And there were the the roaring years of ebooks. So there were ebooks everywhere. Kindle, Apple was coming. And I've understood that there was some room for a technical figure that on one hand knew the publishing world and on the other hand had that technical knowledge. And that was me, actually.
Absolutely.
So I did my internship at the university for a company that developed an ebook creation platform here in Italy based on the EPUB 2 format, which now has closed.
Yeah, not that you'd believe it from how many people are still using it.
Yeah. And then I started attending some conferences around the world because there were no courses at the university about ebooks. There were a lot of manuals. So I went live to actually listen from the people who were developing these new things. And that was amazing. So at that time, there were a lot of different conferences, from Books in Browsers in San Francisco to Tools of Changes in Frankfurt, Bologna for sure. There was another conference in London and in Germany. So I went around the world, and at these conferences, there were not a lot of Italians, but there was usually Cristina Mussinelli. Who doesn't know her? I mean, if you are in the digital publishing world, for sure, you know Cristina. And so,
is she the CEO of Fondazione?
She is the Secretary General of
Secretary
Fondazione,
General. I got the title.
She's the boss, actually.
Right. So, yes, and a real celebrity in our little world.
Right. And so, at the end, after some conferences, Cristina asked me to start collaborating with the Fondazione. And at that time, Fondazione LIA was switching from being a project funded by the Italian government to being a foundation, non-for-profit foundation. And so I
Right.
started. I was quite young, very, very junior, so I had to learn a lot about accessibility. But in this way, I can say that I was born accessible because I started
Yeah.
my technical path in accessibility directly. Yeah, that's the medium long story.
That's perfect. And actually, that really arrives us at the next point I wanted to talk about. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about LIA. I think a lot of people aren't clear. Is this private or state-run, kind of non-profit? Could you maybe explain to us a little bit about LIA's history?
Sure. So actually, LIA began as a project far time ago in 2011 by the Italian Publisher Association. And that project was funded by the Ministry of Cultural Heritage and Activities, and in very strict collaboration with the Italian Blind Union and the Visually Impaired Union here in Italy. So the goal of the project at that time was to implement a concrete example on how a born accessible concept can be done actually in the real world. And so we're starting with creating this born accessible process for ebooks to create a fully accessible publishing ecosystem. So from moving from a model with specialized organization that created accessible ebooks manually and after the publication of the mainstream book to a model in which publishers create and distribute accessible ebooks from the start. And it was really a game changed. Uh, and this has resulted in many, many more accessible ebooks available direct on the market, thereby expanding the reading choices available to people with disabilities. This project required a lot of work along the entire supply chain, from the publisher training to the setup of accessibility quality control system to the creation of the catalog, the metadata for all the accessible ebooks made by publishers, to support of credit card gateways to make their digital payment systems accessible. So in 2014, the project ends. And so the Italian Publisher Association decided to create Fondazione LIA to take over the project's legacy with the ongoing support of the Italian Blind Union. Its goal is to allow the print impaired readers to choose what, when, and how to read. So, continuing fostering the creation of a wider accessible publishing ecosystem. Not only in Italy, but actually we work a lot worldwide. So, in the following years, the Italian Blind Union and the Italian Dyslexia Association and other specialist organizations joined the foundation as institutional members, like the Library for the Blind of Monza. And this was an important step because it allows us to represent together the two ends of the accessible digital publishing supply chain. So those who produce accessible content and those who read it, those having a broad knowledge from ebook production to assistive technologies. Right now, this non-for-profit foundation, which is Fondazione LIA, carries out various activities that can be divided in four strands. First is institutional ones, like the participation at different European and international publisher association, in working groups in the standard organizations such as W3C, Editor, EDR Lab, and so on. And for sure, research, a lot of research and development activities. The other leg on which we support ourselves are projects such as European ones, like the Abe Lab that was just finished, or Apache, which we are running right now, or the ones that are funded by Italian bank foundations, mainly aimed to providing training and support on accessible reading to libraries, teachers, and print impaired end users. But we also offer consultancy and services on all the aspects of accessibility to publishers. Other actors in the publishing value chain and companies uh, are not aware of accessibility. So we support our members and our clients through some specific activities like the certification services, training, and things like that. Actually, all our activities are self-supported financially, apart from a small public funding that we have.
It's the envy of some other places, certainly in Britain, that you have this relationship with
Mhm.
the state kind
Yeah,
of supporting you. We have a state that has amazing accessibility in their own materials, but perhaps not as involved in the industry here. Do you
yeah.
think this is something common across Europe?
I actually don't know how it works in other states. I see that here in Italy there is a small interest in funding this type of things.
Right.
So it's working here, and I think it's a model that can be actually exported
Yeah.
in foreign countries.
Right. So you talked about current projects. Could you tell us about some of the ones that you've got at the moment that you're the most excited about?
Sure. For sure, we are finishing the Abe Lab project, which was a European funded project for working on the backlist titles.
Right.
So we worked with the European Digital Reading Laboratory, EDR Lab, based in France, and with the KB Library, which is the Royal Library of the Netherlands. And together we did great work on assessing the accessibility of backlist, meaning titles that were produced many years ago, checking how they were structured, which are the different categories of the titles, how the files are made from an accessibility point of view. Many of
Right.
them are PDFs or EPUB2, and also testing some remediation tools for transforming old non-accessible EPUBs into accessible EPUBs. And there is the Abelab project for this. And the other project we are working on now that is just started and is managed by Elisa, my colleague, is the Apache project, which is a networking project across different organizations around Europe, where some of these organizations are more focused on the publishing side, some on the end user side, and there is this networking for sharing knowledge, for sharing best practice on how to make publications more accessible and how to be ready for the European Accessibility Act.
Right. And that leads me on to my next question, which is how ready do you think publishing companies are, particularly around Europe, obviously in
Yeah,
Italy? How ready do you think they are for the 28th of June 2025?
it's really difficult to assess this thing to really understand how it's working. We are having different meetings at European level with the Federation of European Publishers. The situation actually is different from state to state. There are smaller states, with lower money, smaller markets, while there are bigger states where publishers are quite ready. In Italy, for sure, we are very lucky because we started early. And so let's say that for the measure of trade publishing, there are no problems at all.
Right.
Most of publishers already have the backlist accessible and certified by LIA. So for school books and university books, there are some challenges because those books are quite complex.
Right.
But we started a few years ago in doing this work. We are putting all the pieces ready in place for 2025. So we are working even there in the more complex books. But it's difficult to say how the other European states are working. My impression is that many publishers are not fully aware of the challenge they have, or if they are aware, they are waiting for more clarification. And actually, I think that there is not too much to wait for. And some decision can be made actually now with little cost, but that may have important benefits for making ebooks accessible. For example, I'm thinking about a lot of publishers, many publishers that are still using EPUB2 format to publish their new titles. And we have seen in the Abile project that there is still a huge number of new titles in EPUB2 formats.
Unbelievable.
We know that it's an old, outdated format. So I think that switching to EPUB3 format is an inexpensive, low-budget choice that every publisher can take right away without having to wait for a new decision, without having to wait for something else.
Yeah.
In Italy, how did it work? We were involved as Fondazione LIA. Publishers were still producing, EPUB2 5 years ago. And so we worked closely with Mondadori, which is the biggest publisher in Italy, and we helped Mondadori in switch from EPUB2 to EPUB3. At the beginning, they just switched the version without any enhancement, let's say, from an accessibility point of view. But that was the baseline for then building on top of that accessibility. So all the new titles in Italy are produced in EPUB3, which is, I think, a big achievement because that enables a lot of accessibility on top.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that we're still having this conversation after,
Right.
I think it's 13 years since EPUB3.
Yeah.
And we're still talking about this transition. Do you think maybe the need to meet the European Accessibility Act will be the final thing that brings the majority of publishers over to EPUB3 at last, just in time for it to get pretty old itself?
I hope. Actually, you can meet the requirements of accessibility even with an EPUB2. So it's not required to use an EPUB3. But for sure, with EPUB3, you have a lot of other benefits. Plus the thing that reading systems are now developed for EPUB3. And so if you are passing an EPUB2 to a reading system, you are likely using then an old version of the reading system, which is not updated anymore, because sometimes in reading system there are multiple softwares, one developed for each format. So I think switching is really, really important. And I think that accessibility is a huge driver. Maybe it's the biggest driver that we have right now for innovation in the digital publishing. And so that may lead to a big switch to EPUB3 in the next year.
We do hope so. While we're talking about standards, if we go back to you, you're known in the standards world increasingly now. I see you on a lot of W3 calls. How did that happen for you? How did you end up involved in web standards and publishing standards?
Yeah, sure. So how I came there. So an important thing that is in the roots of Fondazione LIA is to work only on standards things since the beginning, because it's the only way to being able to make born accessible ebooks in the mainstream without expensive production. And that was the starting point from Christina. And Christina, since the beginning, was really involved in the standard organization, EDPF, that was the International Digital Publishing Forum, who managed the EPUB. She was in the board there, And so for Christina, being part of this network has always been really, really important. So when I joined Fondazione LIA, she started asking me to join the more technical groups since she is not that technical. And it took me like 2 years to really understand where I was and how that worked actually. Because there are a lot of small things, ways to work in this kind of standards. We use a lot of GitHub discussion and issues for getting feedback. We use old style chats for managing things like ERC, and if you want to speak during a call, you have to put yourself in the queue using this IRC. All these things are all things that you have to learn to actually be part of the community. After 2 years in, let's say, staying there and listening, I actually found myself ready to being able to propose something. And I started propose small things, trying to help the others, and at the end, I'm here. But actually, I think that this work on standards is really, really important. Even if it seems really slow, sometimes it requires like 2 months to take decision only on one value of a specific field of, let's say, metadata. But at the end, we have a lot of benefits. And the benefits are for the supply chain, because if we have strong standards, we can enable the market of accessible publications. Often publishers that are approaching the accessibility world are worried, thinking that they have to do a lot of extra work for making their publication accessible, like having a speaker for speaking, for reading aloud the book, or tactile content, or things like that. Or they think that they have to test every book with every specific assistive technology, like using a screen reader on the computer, or reading the whole book with a braille display, which is super complex for everyone. While with standards, we can say that for publishers, their responsibility is to make an EPUB, an ebook, which is compliant with the standard. And if the ebook is compliant with the standard, which is something that they can assess by themselves, just reading the code without having to test with every technology, we are sure then that it will work with every reading system and every technology.
Right.
If the ebook is not working somewhere, it's not a fault of the publisher if they are stick to the standard. It's a fault of the reading system or the assistive technology and all that. So maintaining the fact that it's important for a publisher to understand how end users actually consume and read their content, so the assistive technology they are using, for putting themselves in the shoes of the end user, at the same time is not required to test the publication with the different assistive technology, because we are relying on standards across the supply chain. So we are sure that if we stick to the standard, we are okay. And this is super important also from an economic point of view, because it's much less expensive to make accessible ebooks.
Yeah. And it's really sounds like, from the way you're describing it, the only way to give everybody one steady target to work towards, you need everything to be in the standard. And of course, at this point, not everything we do for accessibility is absolutely nailed down in standards. We're still kind of working towards that. So we still have to try and test where we can. Does LIA conduct testing with real users of accessible technologies?
Sure. So every time we face something new that is not part, let's say, of best practices, and so where we are sure of the result, like we did last year while producing one of the first accessible fixed layout, we test the result with end users. So normally what we do, and this is how it started the project back in 2011, we try to develop the best, let's say, accessible fixed layout ebook we can in the workflow when we are quite ready and we already have assessed that internally with different colleagues with technical expertise. We go in the wild with end users, we do focus group, and so we test the publication with them using different assistive technology, and we gather feedback. And normally we have a second round fixing things and then retry the things with them. So for sure, when there is something new, having this process of testing is super important. When something is stable and we are sure that it works, it's okay with the measure assistive technologies and the measure technology, then we can go through and do the work ourselves.
Right. And then hopefully in time, more precise ways of doing things become part of the standard and everybody can work towards the same thing.
Right.
Gregorio, I remember at the DAISY APC, the Accessible Publishing Conference in November, there was a very proud moment for you when there was a W3 standard put at the front of the room and your name was on there.
Yeah.
How did that feel to see your name there after you mentioned it took a while before you felt confident contributing? How did it feel to see your name there and to know that you're now part of an enduring standard like that? You can tell us a bit more about it.
I still didn't realize that. It seems I've tried different times to explain that to my parents. It was not that simple. I've sent them the document, like the Pub Accessibility 1.1, and with the idea that they may be proud of me doing this work, and they
look, there's
didn't
my
actually
name.
understand. Yeah, but I mean, it's a niche, our market, isn't it? So it's difficult. I think that actually for me, being there is not kind of something that I've achieved. Is more the result of the work that we have done as a community. And since I've been involved in this and I've tried to help in different things, at the end I came there. But I was part of the community, and that is how it ended up.
Right. I remember at that same event, you and I were talking, and you described the work you do as still sort of being in the dungeon, as kind of in the basement. Do you feel like the technology? Do you feel like the technology and publishing worlds? They've always been very interconnected in our niche. Do you feel like there's misunderstanding still between those two worlds? Do you feel like there's still some gap in how the publishing industry understands the role of tech within it?
For sure, the publishing industry, let's say, is really traditional, and a lot of typesetting is really manual, at least in Europe, at least in Italy. We know that there are other markets where there are different workflows, more standardized. And so, normally the professionals working in publishing do not have that knowledge in the technical things, and so they don't actually understand the implications of what they do while typesetting in the export, in the digital export.
Right.
But I think that also the other way around is problematic. So I see a lot of tech people coming in the publishing industry with some strict ideas of how things should work. And most of the time they are right, because things should work in a kind of way. But at the end, their idea do not match how the actual publishing system is working. And so that, our work is always to find the right balance between the best output, accessible output, and the best way of working. And since we have this two knowledge, we are quite good in doing this work, I can say. We work a lot with publishers to fix their workflows. and they ask us to fix their workflows for accessibility, but then it always ends up in fixing their workflows for a lot of
In
other
general.
things,
Yeah.
right? But it's really, really difficult to make these changes from outsiders.
Right. One thing I've noticed when talking to publishers, particularly outside of the technical teams, is there seems to be an expectation that, particularly with accessibility, a lot of the biggest problems can be solved with AI. Some of them even saying we're not going to handle this, we're just going to develop something for AI. How do you respond to this sort of current trend of discussion?
It happened to us different times. Many times, the technical officer in publishing house are asking ourselves, while we do consultancy, to actually ask the production team to do some things that maybe is not that related to accessibility, but can help a lot of other workflows. Because trying to pass some of the requirements as required by accessibility may speed up the introduction of these requirements. I see that as a trend. For sure, what we have seen is that working with accessibility in mind allows to have a better quality of your content and usually a better workflow for your content, not only on the accessibility side. So I see as a side effect actually the growing of quality in content thanks to the driver of accessibility.
Right. But what about the way that these companies expect to use AI to solve that problem? I know you've been writing about AI for image description at least since I think 2020. And how do you feel about that sort of trying to solve problems in that way?
So I see two things. Let's start with the AI for image description. For sure, we all know that creating alt text is one of the most expensive things for creating accessible ebooks. Also, because it is one of the things that you have to do only for making accessible ebooks, while a lot of other things can be compressed while typesetting, while do proofreading and all that. Alt text is really specific only for accessibility. So we started in 2018 with the University of Siena in making a research project at that time for using some tools for labeling images. That were tools based on machine learning that were able to understand what was present in an image. And at that time, with that test, we achieved around 50% of accuracy. That was not that bad, but for sure was not ready for production. And we also have seen that most of these tools were well trained on photographs, but were not well trained in a lot of other images that you can find in publishing material. So starting from that, we worked on another research project. So is the second one that was led by my colleague Chiara for developing a taxonomy for identifying the different types of images that are normally used in publishing. And we end up with 25 different types of images, from maps to cover, signatures, and then you have photographs for sure, infographics, complex images, all that. And so these new models, generative AI, we started a new project, the third one, with a colleague of mine who is having a PhD in Fondazione LIA, is an industrial PhD, is Caterina. And Caterina has this PhD specifically in AI for accessibility. And so she's running this new project for testing different tools based on generative AI for describing different kinds of images. Because we think that there is no one tool that can fit all the needs, and there are different tools that are good at different kinds of images. Let's see. We still see that the AI alone is not is not enough. So having a human in the loop is always important. So you can achieve, as with most of automations, 80% made by the machine and 20% made by humans for editing the text. So that's how is working this part, and we see that is promising. So we hope to have something by the end of this year about this new project.
Right. And I've noticed there seems to be a debate forming in our niche
Yeah.
about how human and AI work together, particularly with image description, whether having the AI generate the initial image description and then a human check it, is that the solution here, or is that actually maybe no quicker than a human writing it in the first place?
Right.
Do you have a strong position in that at this point, or do you think we're still in the experimenting phase?
I don't have a strong position here. For sure, having this work of categorization, we are able to split images based on their category. For example, for logo types, for cover, it's no brain. You can describe that in 5 seconds, I think. So you don't even have to pass it to the machine.
But what about images that don't need description at all? What about making sure that decorative images aren't described, and we're not expecting print disabled people to have to listen to a load of unnecessary descriptions?
That is more complex, I think. I'm not sure that the level of these models that we are using right now for generative AI are good enough for understanding if an image is decorative or not. It's really an editorial work, and it's really an editorial decision. So I think that for that kind of decision, a human is still needed. But even a typesetter is not always aware if an image is decorative or not. So it's really something from the editor side or proofreader side. Is something for who is managing the text and the content.
Yeah, and I'm often saying this to publishers, that people closer to the text need to be involved in some of the decisions we make in accessibility work. Sometimes there still seems to be a kind of gulf there. One of the areas where that comes up, you mentioned context for image descriptions. Context is typically what's cited as what's missing from AI image descriptions.
Right.
It seems to me that that's awareness of the section of the book we're in, the paragraph, the chapter, the part, but also awareness of the whole book, awareness of the genre perhaps that publication sits in, and even awareness of what you can expect of the audience, because how you would talk to an audience in a niche is perhaps different to how you talk to a general audience. So this is where I still think that you have to have some human level. Do you think that this is something that AI is going to be able to tackle in time? Or is this perhaps where the human and AI working together is more of a permanent solution to this sticky problem?
Yeah. For being aware of the context in general, I think there is still need a human. Because, for example, we are seeing that in a lot of scholar images. So, like you have a paragraph explaining a scientific experiment, and then so phase by phase with all the description of what you have to do, and then you have the image showing the phases. So at the end, the description of that image can be just, okay, image of the experiment, because the whole description of the experiment is already available in the text. And for that, it's not that simple for an AI to understand that.
And when we're talking about feeding the AI a whole book or all this other contextual information, obviously that's when copyright concerns begin to creep in. Do you have any tips for publishers when they're looking at using AI tools but are concerned about copyright?
Sure. Two things. One is you can use local models. So you can use, there are different models, open source model that you can install on your computer. Maybe you need a computer with some GPU and some stuff in it. but you can run that locally. And if you run that locally, you are not passing your content to anyone. So it's a good solution, even if these models normally are not that good as the proprietary models that you can query using APIs and all that. And if you want to go on the proprietary side, what I suggest is to really read the terms and conditions, because normally there is where is written how you can opt out for your content, how can you use the service only for querying and not for storing things. So reading terms and conditions normally have the answer to these worries.
Yeah, and I've noticed some of them do offer kind of to use a private instance per
Right.
publisher, because otherwise, obviously, if they start learning from your
Sure.
books, you're kind of becoming part of general knowledge, which is always
Yeah.
a terrifying moment for a publisher
Yeah.
of content.
Yeah.
When we're talking about the future, in a broader sense, what kind of future changes would you like to see for EPUB and for maybe for ebooks is a better way of putting it, maybe even beyond EPUB? Is there anything that you're really hoping to see or looking forward to or working on?
So let's say that the EPUB format seems quite stable right now, and we can say that with EPUB format we can produce most of what is in traditional publishing. Still, there are things that can be improved and can be worked on. One is for sure fixed layout and being able to have a reflowable view of a fixed layout. This is something that seems quite promising and interesting, and I know that there are people working on it, like Adrian Gardeur. So that it's interesting, but it's not a huge change. It's something that can be done with small changes of the standard. There is also another big push for new kind of publications like webtoons. There has been a lot of discussion there, so maybe having a format or a specific version of the format for some kind of publications like comics, mangas, and webtoons may something that may be interested. And there, the accessibility is challenging for sure, because this content is mainly images, decorative images.
Right.
And then I see more and more the use of EPUB format as a B2B format. So EPUB format was developed for interoperability. So the user can buy an ebook in EPUB and carry it everywhere in any publication. But at the end, as for music, as for movies, we end up with silos. So you buy your ebook from Amazon and you can read it only on your Kindle. You buy it from Apple and you can read it only on your Apple devices. So this interoperability is actually something that is losing its interest, even if it's really important, especially in some contexts like libraries. I mean, it's important interoperability, but I see a lot of use of EPUB as a B2B format. What do I mean like that? For example, a scholar publisher who is managing the production and the platform where the user can read the book, and the platform is a web platform, they don't need to use EPUB. They can pass from, let's say, InDesign to the web via HTML. But they prefer to use EPUB because with EPUB, you have a lot of tools already developed. You have authoring tools, you have EPUB check for validating it, you have ACE for checking the accessibility. So using EPUB has a lot of benefits from the community. So the use of EPUB only for internal work, for managing external suppliers, is something that is coming more and more. And I think that there may be some research that can be done to fit for specific needs of production flows. So looking at that as a B2B format may be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes back to the importance of standards that you were talking about
Sure.
earlier. It's the work is already done for you. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's no need to kind of develop all this stuff from scratch.
Yeah.
Speaking of B2B, of course, the dominant format in that world, in a lot of ways, remains as PDF.
Sure.
How do you feel about PDF still being around to the extent that it is, even now that we've got fixed layout EPUB, as if that's new, and sort of accessible EPUB? I know there's a notion that not everybody is aware of. How do you feel about PDF in this current world?
Sure. So as Fondazione LIA, we produce quite a lot of accessible PDFs, mainly for company reports. So not in the publishing field, also because in the publishing field, mainly in the trade publishing, you cannot actually publish, you cannot distribute a PDF. The major platforms do not accept PDFs as a format for ebooks. While for banks, for insurance companies, the format they use for distributing their content is PDFs. And so we have been working that since, I started in Fondazione LIA working on accessible PDFs like 10 years ago. So, and we do a lot of that production. You can achieve quite a good level of accessibility in PDFs. For sure, you cannot have the same enriched semantic that you can have in HTML or in EPUB, but still you can have something that is really can be read quite easily by like blind users. Let's say that for a blind user, having a well tagged accessible PDF is normally is a good format for assessing the content. Where is tricky is for visually impaired and for people who needs to change the formatting of the text. Because as we know, PDF is really fixed. So you cannot change the font family, you cannot change the font size, you cannot change the colors and all that. Because PDF wasn't originally designed as a publishing format for long form reading. It was designed for transmitting formats more than for reading it digitally. So that is tricky. We know that the new version of PDF UA, which is PDF UA2, seems to support the reflowable reading. And we know that in some applications like Adobe Reader, you can actually read the PDF in a reflowable way using what they call AI for transforming it. But still, we don't see a lot of other reading solutions ready to support this way of read. So I think that when PDFs and reading solution especially will be ready to display the same content of the PDF in a reflowable way, which is the same challenge we have for fixed layout EPUBs, we can say that PDFs, accessible PDFs are okay. But since we are waiting for that, PDFs are, from my point of view, quite a good format for distributing content, but are not the best format for all these things that I mentioned.
Right, and your own standards work is going to continue on EPUB and related technologies.
Yeah. But because at the end, what we see is that PDFs are getting more and more from EPUB standard to make PDFs more accessible, like the so-called digital publishing ARIA roles, which are a way for enriched semantic in EPUBs, designed specifically for publishing. I know that in the PDFs world are looking at that roles really interesting and trying to adopt them in the PDF standards, as well as for accessibility metadata. So actually, the work that we are doing in accessible EPUBs are also making some influence in the PDF world.
Right, just working on the same things in parallel.
Right.
Gregorio, the hour has sped by. You're really a gold mine of information. So I want to say thank you so much for coming on the
Thanks.
podcast. How could people get in touch with you and keep up with what's going on with LIA?
Sure. We have our website and our social media channels, especially on LinkedIn. So please ask me to connect and subscribe to our newsletter. I just want to add one thing that I
Please.
didn't mention, but is really, really fundamental thing in Fondazione LIA,
Yeah.
which is all the work that we do for checking the accessibility of ebooks. So in Italy, for all the ebooks produced by publishers that are LIA members, we check their files file by file for being sure that they are accessible, and we produce the accessibility metadata for them. And I think that this work in quality assurance for accessibility is really one of the most important work of Fondazione LIA. And I'm sorry that I didn't mention that before, but it's really one of the key things we started with, and is still one of the most important things that we are running day by day.
I think that is a perfectly fitting ending, in fact, so no apologies necessary. Gregorio, thanks again so much for appearing. And we'll catch all of you guys next time when you tune back in, hopefully, to the Digital Publishing Podcast.
Thanks, bye.